Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 952B, and today's date is April 22nd, 2016, and the title of the episode is New Report Shows the U.S. and the World Governments Are Preparing for Mass Civil Disobedience. Now, before we get started, I just want to make an announcement. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'll be uploading an interview with Bill Holter. We discuss why Saudi Arabia was threatening to sell some of their assets. We talked about the economy, we talked about the rigging of gold, and where the economy is headed. If you are on the X22 Report email alert system, I'll send you an email. If you're subscribed to the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel, you should get an email from YouTube. If not, come right over to the channel and you'll see the interview. I'm going to try to put this interview up in the morning, so I will send all the information out at that time. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, at this point, we realize that the government continually uses false flags to make people do things they normally wouldn't want to do. And we saw a lot of mass shootings here in the United States because they've been trying to push gun legislation. And very interestingly, I heard Chelsea, I guess she was giving a speech saying that since Supreme Court Justice Scalia, since he died, now is the time to get rid of the Second Amendment. And everything that we talked about in the past about why this sudden death of Scalia happened and occurred, we realize that this is part of a bigger agenda. Now, remember, they just can't get rid of the Second Amendment. All the states have to vote. The people have to vote, and it has to be unanimous. That's how things are actually changed. The Supreme Court, the government just can't come out and say, okay, let's get rid of this right. Let's just get rid of this. It just doesn't happen that way. And we can see at this point that they're not going to get this. But they're trying to convince the people that this is what's going to happen. Remember, this is all part of their brainwashing. And we see out in Denver that schools are going to arm guards with military-style rifles. They're going to look very militarized. And this is to protect the children. And you have to remember, this is all part of their plan to make it seem like you need the government. You need the government to protect you. You need the military outside your door. And we see that in many schools there are a lot of active shooter drills. And this is becoming very common in schools. This is to scare the students. This is to brainwash them into thinking that, this is the way it is. Well, a lot of these mass shootings, I would say 99.999% of them, they are done by the government. They are created for certain agendas. One of them is to get rid of weapons and take the weapons from the people. This has been their agenda for a very, very long time. Now they have Common Core, where they're also teaching the children and brainwashing them into thinking that your rights are privileges, that the Second Amendment doesn't mean that you have the right to bear arms. Actually, they're rewriting the rights in the textbooks. They're rewriting them and abbreviating them. And that's what they're teaching to the children today. So you can see this is all part of their brainwashing scheme. And you have to remember, the children are the future of America. That's the next generation. And the public schools right now, they're training them to become accustomed to living in a big brother police state. And we as a people need to change this, because the founding fathers never wanted the federal government to take control of the school systems. They thought it would be a better idea if the community came together and decided, okay, this is what we're going to teach our children. Actually, since the Department of Education came into existence, the United States has steadily declined and has been getting lower and lower in the rankings around the world, because they're giving us systems that are not a benefit to the children. It's, again, a system that benefits their agendas. Now, the EU, they're looking to spy on every single person, just like every other government. And, well, the EU is not really an elected government. But since the terrorist attacks in Brussels, we talked about how they're going to collect the flight data and information about everyone flying around. But now they want to create a single access point for authorities to look at people's personal data, including fingerprints, facial scans, bank records. And they want to link all this up all over the place where all of this can now be shared. Not just with people who are flying, everybody. So we see what's happening at this point. The United States is also working on a system very similar to that. The EU is working on a system similar to that because they want to track everything about everyone. Where they are, what they're doing, what they're purchasing, what they're saving, what they're hiding. Again, it's Big Brother. They want full control of our lives because they feel that if they don't have full control, the people might rise up, and that is a threat to their authority. And this is why they want the full control, because eventually what they'll do is they'll keep taxing, they'll keep pushing more laws, and eventually we know what happens. The people can't take it anymore. They push them back into a corner. They have nothing to lose, and they lash out. And this is why we've seen revolutions. This is why we've seen kingdoms fall. This is why we've seen governments fall. Because every time they push, and they push too hard, the billions of people come down hard on the couple of thousand people that are trying to control us. And they're replaced. And then it repeats over and over. Now, Paul Craig Roberts, he wrote an interesting article about how Washington right now is attacking the BRIC nations, and we see them trying to get rid of and pushing to get rid of presidents of certain countries like Argentina. We see with Brazil, Dilma Rousseff trying to push as hard as they possibly can to get rid of these individuals so they can put in a puppet government and break up the BRICS system. And we see right now that Washington, they create these stories with no proof whatsoever. Like, for example, President Kirchner. Washington said she had to go. So they concocted a story that Kirchner covered up an alleged Iranian bombing in Buenos Aires in 1994. And, of course, there was no evidence of Iranian involvement, but they pushed the idea. In Brazil, Washington has used corruption to get Rousseff impeached by the lower house. And, of course, the evidence, not necessary, just allegations. And really, it is no different than the chemical weapons in Syria, no difference than the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There's no difference that Iran had nuclear weapons. Basically, what the U.S. continually does is they put propaganda out there, they put it all over the corporate media, and they make people believe that this is true, but they don't have any evidence to back it up. And every time we look at this information, we need to make the connection of where is the evidence, where is the proof. And every single time the U.S. comes up short with providing the proof. And if they do provide the proof, it's completely made up because they can't go any further than surface. And we see this happen time and time again. Now, they're not just going after these two countries. They're also going after Ecuador and Bolivia. They are also targeted. And we can see right now they're doing this because they realize the BRIC nations, they're going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And countries are going to say, hey, you know something? Maybe we should dump the dollar. Maybe we should move over to this new economic system because the dollar is dying, the U.S. system is dying, and we see this is growing. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the propaganda is running wild right now. We know that Yatsenyuk, he resigned, and we're starting to see that things are rapidly falling apart. If you really think about it, Ukraine, where they tried to enter the EU, it seems that that's completely falling apart. We have to remember Ukraine is very important for the transmission of natural gas through Gazprom Russian pipelines, and Ukraine is the bridge, and we see at this point that the central bankers, the United States government, they don't have full control of Ukraine at this point. They're They didn't get the strategic location on the Black Sea. And right now, they have nothing left at this point. United States and NATO, they have failed miserably in their attempt to undercut Russia by securing parts of Syria, by getting Ukraine. And we see right now that they're in big trouble. And as this continually falls apart, we see the corporate media right now using propaganda to convince everyone that Russia is getting ready to go into Ukraine, and troops are now piling up on the border once again. And they're continually pushing this idea, and what this tells me is that the opposite is about to happen. Because every plan they had in Ukraine completely fell apart. And they're getting ready for a major war there. And here we are coming up into the spring. And we're going to have to watch this very carefully because we see that the shelling is continuing. We see that military equipment is being moved up to the contact line. And things are starting to ramp up in this area. Now, Russia, they have just conducted a successful intercontinental ballistic missile test, testing a hypersonic cruise vehicle. And today, all modern nuclear warheads are delivered on targets using ballistic trajectory that can be calculated. Therefore, such warheads could be intercepted. And this is what the United States did. But the problem now is that China and Russia are developing these hypersonic warheads, and their design allows the missiles to maneuver by yaw and pitch, which makes it impossible to intercept, thus making any existing and upcoming missile defense system kind of worthless at this point. And especially what the United States has now, it is absolutely worthless at this point. So they're not going to stop any type of nuclear launch coming to the United States. I mean, this is part of their plan. Once they go to war, is that they'll be able to strike first and then stop what's coming over. But I don't think that's going to work. Actually, many people think this is not going to work. Now, we can see things are ramping up now, and it looks like General Curtis Scaparrotti, he's going to replace General Breedlove as the next NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and he is saying that, okay, we're done with this rotation in Europe. Because of Russian aggression, we need to have permanent brigades in Europe. And they need to stay there. We need to establish permanent armored brigades in Europe to deter Russian aggression. So they're stepping this up right now because we know what they're getting ready for. They're getting ready for war. They've been planning this for a very long time. Why do you think all these troops are being moved out into certain locations? All the military assets have been moving into these different locations in the Pacific, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe. They're doing it so they are ready for war. This is what the buildup has been about. Now, we see right now that things with Turkey, they're breaking apart right now because they have up until April 19th to come up with a system that they have to abide by with the EU to have visa-free access. And it looks like Turkey is only halfway there. Now, we see Turkish Prime Minister is warning that his nation will tear up the EU-Turkish migrant deal unless his citizens are given visa-free access to the EU on June 1st. So we realize that they have millions of these refugees in Turkey right now. Russia realizes this. Russia has now deployed around 50,000 troops to the EU border because they're very nervous that intermixed into this is going to be a lot of the Islamic State mercenaries. And they're very worried that they're going to wreak havoc in the area. And we're starting to see things are really getting out of hand. And at this point, it looks like Turkey is blackmailing. Actually, I shouldn't say it looks like. They are blackmailing the EU at this point. They blackmail them with funds, They're blackmailing them with visa-free access to the EU. And we see right now, if the EU doesn't bow down to Turkey, all hell is going to break loose. Now, Europeans are saying that the United States is threatening them, and they are trying to keep them from trading with Iran. Now, we have to remember why. Because the P5+1 nuclear deal had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. It had to do with the central bank, with the U.S., and the petrodollar. They wanted Iran to place the dollar on their oil, and everything would be okay. Well, Iran is not cooperating. They're going to be going with maybe the euro, and then that's going to be temporary, and then they'll be moving to another currency. So right now, Europe is saying that we're being threatened by America. They're saying that they will not allow us, because they're putting a lot of pressure on us to trade with Iran. And I believe they're doing this on purpose to pressure Iran to do what they want. They can't place sanctions on Iran because they're abiding by the P5+1 talks. They've done everything they possibly can, and other countries that were involved in this, they're ready to do business with them. But the U.S. doesn't want that yet, because they understand the real deal was to use the dollar on the oil. Now we see that the problems in Nagorno-Karabakh is getting worse. We see the statements from Turkey. They are calling for war. And this is coming from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And he said, I believe the statements that were voiced from the mouths of the Turkish leadership are absolutely unacceptable for one simple reason. They're not calling for peace. They're calling for war. He said these were calls to solving the conflict using military force. Well, this is what they want. They're trying to provoke Russia in any way they possibly can, in any country they possibly can. They want a war. Now, Obama, he made a visit to Iraq, and he's saying that the U.S. military is going to stay in Iraq. And they're saying that the country is completely unstable right now, and this is proof that America needs to be more involved in Iraq. And I thought we were finished with Iraq. Didn't he say that he was bringing the troops home, and now we have 7,000 to 8,000 troops back in Iraq? Well, the question is why? Why all of a sudden do we have to stay in Iraq? Well, the reason for it is because they're having the same problem with Iraq that they're having with all the other countries. The people of the country don't want the puppet governments anymore. And they're trying to keep Prime Minister Abadi in power. He's saying that he's a good partner. He's a good puppet that we can control. And we see right now that they're very concerned that he will not be able to hold power in Iraq, because his power there is not strong enough. And the people might say, you know something, we want somebody different in there, and if we get someone different in there, they might not be as friendly to the United States as the puppet governments. And we saw this, and we're still seeing it happen in Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, and it is spreading. And their whole entire plan is completely falling apart. And this is why the petrodollar is doomed. Because the people are starting to realize there's internet now, there's people talking to other around the world, everyone's realizing what's going on, and they're saying, okay, we want our countries back. We know what's going on right now. Now, out in Syria, the talks are breaking down, and we see that the Syrian Prime Minister is saying that the UN efforts, they have not had any success in the talks whatsoever. The terror groups do not want to preserve the Syrian government. They just want Assad removed. They only have one agenda, and that's all they have. Well, we knew this from the beginning. This is the same thing that we saw in Geneva 1 talks, Geneva 2. Here we are in Geneva 3, and nothing's going to change. They still are sticking to their goal, and that is to remove Assad. Now, we understand the opposition. They walked out, one of the opposition groups. They walked out of the talks. They said it's going nowhere. And Lavrov from Russia is saying, good, let them leave. We're not inviting them back. They are done here. Maybe the talks will improve at this point, but I don't think they will. I think the rest of the opposition groups, they're really not coming together. They're being coached by the United States government, by Saudi Arabia, by the other coalition forces, and they only have one goal in mind at this point. And we see right now that the U.S., they're going after the Islamic State. The coalition forces, they're going after the Islamic State. At least this is what they're telling us. But they're not going to cooperate with Russia, who is also going after the Islamic State that was invited into Syria. So is the United States really going after the Islamic State? No, they're the proxy army for the United States government central bankers. Why would they destroy the army they built? It would make no sense. They spent a lot of money on this army. Actually, they spent a lot of money to build this army, and they're spending about $11 million a day to bomb the infrastructure of Syria and pretend they're going after the Islamic State. So, right now, as the economy falls apart, as war is brewing in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, and in the Pacific, we get a new report from Sandler Research saying they are forecasting that there's going to be global riots around the globe. And it appears world governments are aware that there's going to be civilian discontent. And so what are the countries doing? Well, they are purchasing riot gear, riot control equipment. And one of the prominent markets is Canada and the U.S. And they're saying that law enforcement agencies in these nations are best equipped with upgraded weapons. The militarization of the police department and other law enforcement agencies in Americas has encouraged the use of advanced riot control equipment, and it seems like the U.S. is quite ready, and Canada is quite ready for what is coming. You have to remember that as the system falls apart, as the collapse occurs, we're going to see deliveries to supermarkets, to stores. It's going to dry up. We've seen it in Argentina. We've seen it in many other countries. And this is going to make people scared, nervous, afraid. And they're going to run to the stores and try to get whatever they possibly can. Now, tack on inflation to this, where the dollar is losing its value, things are going to continually go up in price. So it makes the situation even worse. Tack on people losing their jobs. This is going to escalate to a point where everything's going to be out of control. We're going to see mass rioting all over the place. And we can see why world governments at this point are out there and purchasing all of this type of equipment, because they realize eventually what's going to happen is when this system comes down, they're going to have a lot of people that are going to be very upset, and they need to control them. Because where are the people going to point their finger? They're going to point their finger at government and central banks. And they're going to say, you are responsible for this. And they're going to want them removed. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.